Great. Well, I suggest we kick off. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and a very warm welcome. I can see we have our excellent panelists online as well, and lots of people still joining. But welcome to this, the second of BritCham Vietnam sector-focused webinars. I was really pleased to moderate the first of these back in August, focusing on the education sector, and really glad that today we look at another priority sector in the form of Vietnam's pharmaceutical industry. So I'd like to really thank the British Chamber of Commerce for organising this fantastic series, and also offer my thanks to our sponsor for today's session, ACSV Legal. Thank you for your support. So just by housekeeping, all of our audience members joining today, please feel free to submit your questions for our experts. And to do that, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and submit your questions that way. We will do our absolute best to get through those during the discussion today. But failing that, we can follow up subsequently with you. And please also note that the event today is being recorded. So let me introduce myself briefly. My name is Sam Woods. I'm the Deputy Consul General here at the British Consulate in Ho Chi Minh City. And I also head up our trade and investment team here, covering priority sectors for UK companies. The healthcare sector is a major priority amongst those, and for the Department for International Trade here in Vietnam. Particularly given pharmaceuticals constitute such a significant proportion of overall UK exports to Vietnam. So in that context, I'm really pleased to be moderating this session, and it's very timely in the context, particularly of the free trade agreement signed between the UK and Vietnam earlier this year. And here in Vietnam, we've seen immense growth in the pharmaceutical sector over the last decade, as all of our panelists will know very well, becoming one of the fastest growing markets globally. In particular, thanks to a stronger regulatory framework, but also ever-growing domestic demand here in Vietnam. According to IQVIA, a consultancy, Vietnam's pharmaceuticals market is valued currently at around $4.6 billion and achieved a compound annual growth rate of 6% in the period 2018 to 2020. And forecasts show that this trend is predicted to continue, with the industry likely to reach up to $14.6 billion in sales value by 2028. So clearly this presents immense opportunities to international businesses and those of you looking to access the market here, with over half of the market demand met by imported products. And in 2020, Vietnam imported more than $3 billion in pharmaceuticals, ranking it second across the whole of the ASEAN region in terms of value. Obviously, as we all know, COVID-19 has had major implications for trade and investment flows globally, and Vietnam has been no exception, particularly in the most recent quarter. However, the performance of the pharmaceutical industry has remained extremely strong. And as I mentioned, the ratification of the FTA earlier this year offers new opportunities and further chances for bilateral UK-Vietnam trade to deepen. So I'm confident that in that context, the pharmaceutical industry will continue to benefit as well. So really pleased that you're not just going to hear from me. We also have the pleasure of a fantastic panel of industry experts. And I would just like to welcome you all briefly. We've got Ms. Elaine Chu, Special Counsel for ACSV Legal. So thank you very much, Elaine, for being with us today, and also for ACSV's sponsorship of this session. We've also got Mr. Nitin Kapoor. Good afternoon, Nitin, Chairman and General Director for AstraZeneca Vietnam and for Asia Area Frontier Markets, and also a board member for BritCham Vietnam. So welcome, Nitin, very good to see you. And finally, a very warm welcome to Ms. Alex Ryland, Chief Commercial Officer at Pharma City. Alex, thank you for giving up your time today. So I suggest without further ado, we move into the first part of the webinar, and I would like to begin by inviting Ms. Elaine Chu to provide an overview, please, of pharmaceutical regulations here in Vietnam, and to offer, if you will, some practical advice for companies looking to bring new investment or to export medicines to the Vietnamese market. Just a reminder for the audience, please do leave any questions you have for Elaine in the Q&A box, and as I say, we will hopefully have some time for those later on. Elaine, over to you, please.
Right. Okay. Thank you for the kind introduction, Sam. I hope no issues are hearing me as well. And before we dig slightly deeper into the topic at hand, just a brief introduction about myself and my firm ACSV Legal. Next slide, please. So personally, I've been practicing lawyer for over a decade now, and my expertise is focused on ASEAN markets, notably in Vietnam. And through my firm, ACSV Legal, our speciality is in mergers, acquisition transactions with a focus of a strong commercial approach. And quite interestingly, this year as well, we have had a number of inquiries and have been working on a range of health-related matters, which include various acquisitions and pharma restructuring, which ties in very neatly with today's topic and to reinforce the point that there is tremendous potential in the health sector market in Vietnam. Next slide, please. So I hope to present to you in my presentation today from both legal and practical perspective with regards specifically to importation of pharmaceutical products, with a big picture overview from incorporation setup to licensing issues, and finally to challenges faced in this market as captured in this agenda slide. Next slide. Well, the first thing you should be aware of is the key legislations that governs the importation of pharmaceutical products, as well as the relevant regulatory authorities. Next slide. So in Vietnam, pharmaceutical products, including drugs and biologicals, are under the overall management of the Ministry of Health, MOH, as well as its subset division known as Drug Administration of Vietnam, DAV. So in terms of legislation, as you can see from this slide for pharmaceutical products, the primary legislation is Law on Pharmaceuticals 2016, which took effect on 1st January 2017, replacing the previous Law on Pharmacy 2005. So a huge 12-year gap before the introduction and implementation of the new law. And subordinate legislations include 54, Decree 54, and Decree 155, which pretty much guides implementation on Law of Pharmaceutical 2016. Next slide. So now that you have a semblance on the regulatory authorities and the relevant legislation, the next important point is to understand the distinction of what you can or cannot do, either as a domestic company or as a foreign invested company in Vietnam. Next slide. And this table provides just a snapshot of that. So under the Law on Pharmaceutical 2016, there are typically about 8 types of businesses, pharmaceutical businesses. And most notably, I would like to draw your attention to the portions highlighted in red. These are explicitly set out in Law on Pharmaceutical, that these are businesses that are not allowed to be provided by FIE. So for instance, FIE cannot provide pharmaceutical storage services, they cannot be wholesalers of pharmaceuticals, and they can't be drug retailers. For the other businesses, it is not explicitly prohibited, but yet with any licensing method in Vietnam, just note that it's still very much at the discretion of the authorities when they view your licensing application. But take comfort knowing that there's no explicit prohibition, and in reality, there are a lot of FIEs that are doing such services as well. So, which brings me to the point whereby, despite obviously limitation to it, a lot of FIEs are having to retool their supply chain in Vietnam and having to even cooperate with local companies in order to conduct the same, or restructure the operations itself to conduct the same as well. And in terms of restructuring, that's really another subject matter by itself, which we can tackle on a different day. Next slide. So with such restrictions in mind, let us come back to the real topic at hand concerning importation of pharmaceutical products. To be clear and to avoid confusion, FIEs are allowed to import, but it is clear for now at least that Vietnam is not inclined to open the market to FIEs for direct distribution of pharma products. And this is evidenced by the WTO commitments and various FTAs, as well as Circular 34. So this is quite frustrating for a lot of FIEs not being able to go beyond their importation rights. But that said, Article 91 of Decree 54 eventually did allow for distribution, but in very limited circumstances and in 2 scenarios, as you can see here. First scenario is whereby if such drugs are manufactured in Vietnam, or second, the distribution of the imported pharmaceutical products is to be distributed to only certified local wholesalers. So distribution is allowed, but in very limited circumstances. Next slide. So now that we have a legal overview, so what the next question would be, what is next for an FIE? They're still interested in setting up a presence in Vietnam. Next slide. Naturally, the answer to that question is an incorporation of some form. So, which brings me here on this slide are your options available to you. And typically there are two options. It's either a setup of a new company, or second is the acquisition of shares in an existing local company or a joint venture. So both of these options has its advantages and its disadvantages. And it really boils down to your business plans and commercial needs. And in either scenario, it's typically a two-pronged process. So in option one, what you do as someone that's coming in to set up a new company is the first thing you do is to apply what is known as the IRC, which is the Investment Registration Certificate, which is essentially an approval for your investment. And that's the biggest obstacle, really. And once that is obtained, you will then proceed to apply for your ERC, which is the Enterprise Registration Certificate, or more commonly known as the Incorporation Certificate. With option two, it is also, like I said, a two-pronged process, very similar, but in different names. Instead of IRC is what you call first step is an M&A approval. Again, is approving your acquisition of the shares. Once that's obtained, then you proceed to amend the ERC to reflect the new ownership. One thing I would like to emphasize on this point in relation, I think I mentioned before, in relation to licensing, is that especially for the uninitiated, not familiar with the Vietnamese market, you should be mindful that licensing procedures in Vietnam involves a lot of paperwork. And while it is not difficult, it is just a very time-consuming process. So take, for example, a company set up in Singapore or Hong Kong will probably take a few days to a week. But in Vietnam, a new FIE setup or even an acquisition in a local company could potentially take up to 3 months in practice. So, which brings me back again to emphasize, if you were to set up presence in Vietnam, I think there needs to be an adjustment of mindset, and patience will be required. So in any case, once this process is done, step one is completed, you will either have a new company or become a co-owner of an existing company. Next slide. So once a company is set up, step two would be a requirement for such company to apply for the Certificate of Eligibility for Pharma Importing Business, or more commonly known as the shortened form Medicine Import License. So the function for this license is self-explanatory, as to provide the company the right to conduct such businesses. The conditions imposed are not out of the ordinary, as you can see, storage equipment, transportation, appropriate premises that fulfill good storage practice requirements, so on and so forth. But like any licensing work, like I've mentioned, it is a cumbersome process. So by law, this typically takes about 30 days, but in practice, this could take up to 3 months. Next slide. So now that the company itself is set up and the eligibility certificate is obtained, comes step 3, which in my opinion is the most cumbersome and time-consuming process. And this is very specific to the product itself. So for any product, you would typically need an approval known as the Market Authorization, MA, either as standalone or require an import license specific to the pharma products as well. So in this table, this provides a snapshot of the types of imported pharma products. So for instance, item 1 will be drugs with the market authorization. In this case, import license will not be required. In item 2, this would be, case in point, would be the vaccination, where MA was not required and the import license was required. And then for item 3, this would be the control drugs with MA, and in this case, an import license will be required. Next slide. So in the following slides, we'll be talking more about MA and import license itself. So let's dig deeper in terms of market authorization. So like I said, under Vietnamese law, drugs and pharmaceutical products need to have the market authorization number attached to it before it can be put into free sale into the market. So by law, as I set up in this slide, it takes up to 12 months and is typically valid for 5 years or 3 years in special circumstances. And for 3 years, this will be for cases in terms of new drugs or vaccines, reference biologicals or similar biologicals that apply for market authorization in Vietnam for the first time. It is important to note that within 1 year prior to expiry, you should submit an application for renewal, and the renewal takes about 3 months. And the reason why I want to emphasize that is because if you fail to actually submit your renewal during that time, you will actually have to do a new submission again, as if it was a new market authorization, which will be a longer time period. So something to take note of. Next slide. In terms of import license, and when compared to the market authorization, it is relatively easier and more straightforward. As you can see, it can be a standalone, meaning MA will not be required. And case in point will be the recent vaccination rollout, like I mentioned, whereby it will qualify under the category of drugs used for emergency demands on prevention and elimination of epidemics. So in such case, by law, it takes about 3 business days to be obtained. But there are some cases where such import license could take up to 7 business days, 15 days, and up to 90 days. Again, this is by law, and in practice, it could potentially be longer. One important point I want to point out in terms of import license is the validity of it, which is limited, meaning it is a one-time importation right for approved quantities. So anything beyond that will require a separate import license each time. Next slide. Which finally brings me to the practical challenges faced, especially from a licensing perspective. Now, I'll touch on this very briefly, as no doubt Mr. Nitin and Alex would have more perspective from other aspects of challenges and have more practical experiences to share as well. Next slide. The first point I would like to raise is the application to obtain the MA in practice is actually longer than 12 months. In fact, it takes up to 3 years. And this is the situation. And during such period, it's typically followed up with many requests of further information, documentation, making it very cumbersome. And it does not provide priority to pharma products already licensed and approved in other more stringent controlled jurisdiction. So consequently, this has resulted in severe delay in market circulation. It also leads to delay in new medicines being introduced in the market. And most importantly, patients' access for treatment is also limited. And the last point I'll touch on in terms of challenges from a licensing perspective is that the validity of the MA is very short. So like I said, it's either 5 years or 3 years. But in practice, it's even shorter when it comes to the selling of such products, because even after obtaining the MA, FIEs will typically spend a few months to up to a year to prepare the planning before it actually sells them. So that's the reality of the situation here. But despite the challenges, Vietnam generally has made so much progression. And at times, it may be the case of 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, but it's still a 1 step forward. So something to bear in mind in that regard. Next slide. So which brings me to conclusion. I think we can move on to the next slide as well. So I would say is, despite the challenges, I feel like MNCs has continuously evolved, meaning, they still see potentials. MNCs are still here. They have been adapting, changing from what was, their previous structure would typically be a representative office to a full-fledged company, meaning with the intent to have more active participation in when the laws relax. And also, like I've said earlier in my presentation, we've also seen increasing number of mergers acquisition in the pharma sector. So, case in point, I'll just throw in very quickly. We have Sanofi, was turned into the first lawful multinational importer in pharmaceuticals production in Vietnam since 2019. With AstraZeneca, I'm sure Nitin can elaborate further, who transformed its Vietnamese arm into FIE since last year. M&As, we have Sanofi and Vina Pharma, GSK and OPV. So tremendous growth in that regard. That's from the FIE perspective. In terms from a locals perspective, I think it's also encouraging in terms of commitment from Vietnam with the recent decision 376 issued in March 17 to 2021, which approves the development program for pharmaceutical industry until 2030. So with the aim of building 8 regions for sustainable exploitation of natural medicinal materials by 2025, and also to introduce special incentives. This is, further enhanced by Vietnam's ratification to various FTAs, including UKTA, which will reduce and remove import tariffs for pharmaceutical products from the UK. So to sum up, the intent is welcoming, and only time will tell in terms of further detailed guidances and implementation. But all in all, it may not be the easiest market. Vietnam's pharmaceutical market still has tremendous potential in that regard. So with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Great, Elaine, huge thanks for that. It's really clear from your presentation that the regulatory and legal framework here can be a challenge for firms looking to access the market, but we really appreciate such a concise overview of some of the specifics, and also encouraging to get your optimistic conclusion there about the progress that Vietnam continues to make. So many thanks for your time, much appreciated. Our next speaker knows all of these realities all too well. Mr. Nitin Kapoor, in his capacity as Chairman and General Director for AstraZeneca Vietnam, has worked extremely closely with the Vietnamese government on the healthcare sector and pharmaceuticals in general, particularly in the context of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, but also more generally playing a role in strengthening the healthcare system here. So Nitin, it's a real pleasure and a privilege to have you involved. And we would welcome some insights from you now, please, on the Vietnamese market, how you see it as sizing up to others in the region, particularly in terms of oncology, vaccines and prescription medicines. And we'd welcome also any reflections on where you see the future trends, opportunities and challenges. So not much to cover, but over to you, please, Nitin.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Thank you for a very wonderful and a kind introduction. And Elaine, thank you so much for a great reflection on the legal system. It just reminded me of our journey transitioning from a humble rep office to an FIE, foreign investment enterprise, last year, which I would say it was rather than a 1.5-year process rather than 3 or 4 months, as you rightly touched on. And of course, pleasure also to be here with our co-panelist, Alex, from Pharma City. So I find myself in this wonderful position today with Sam from British Embassy, who as AstraZeneca, as a British-Swedish company, has been a great supporter along with the other embassy colleagues. And of course, you always need a good support from a legal team to set up in a country like Vietnam or any country. And then, of course, you need very good trade partners like Pharma City in any country to make sure that patients are able to access your innovative medicines or your products. So very happy to join this discussion today. So allow me to share my reflections. I have been in this wonderful country for the last, starting a 4th year now in Vietnam. And I must say, the good old saying, difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations. And I think Vietnam is a great example. There are many challenges, many difficulties, but I sincerely believe it is a country full of opportunity, full of potential, a country with almost 100 million population, very good demographic, strong GDP history, and a very entrepreneurial government who's always willing to support a good intention, a business with a good intention and good ideas. So allow me to share some thoughts. Go to the next slide, please. Before we do, AstraZeneca, go to the next slide, please. AstraZeneca is a global biopharmaceutical company. We are, of course, present in most countries around the world. In my capacity, I look after Vietnam and few other countries in Southeast Asia. We are, of course, an innovative pharmaceutical company, i.e. most of our products, and in fact, all of our products are by nature prescription medicines. We primarily focus in oncology, respiratory, cardiovascular, renal diseases, and of course, the COVID-19 vaccine, which I'm very pleased to say has reached, we have delivered over 2 billion doses around the world, and it's now being used in 170 countries plus all around the world. with an extensive coverage in middle and low income countries. So very proud of that collaboration with Oxford University to make it such a widely available vaccine around the world. Go to the next slide, please. Specifically, I think if we look at whether it is Vietnam or for that matter, any country in the world, we have all experienced and faced, regardless of the industry you're in, the global pandemic shock. The GDP numbers have moved in the southern direction, in the wrong direction, as we would say, in across the world. Vietnam is no stranger to that. But I must say Vietnam did still much better than many other countries in this part of the world and globally. So whilst we have seen the impact on GDP, but I think I remain confident from a Vietnam context that the recovery and the bounce back would be very strong, given a very robust and decisive focus from Vietnamese government to inoculate as many people as possible and to reach herd immunity quite quickly. And on that note, I think the big cities like Ho Chi Minh, Hanoi are already at herd immunity phase, and most of the adult populations are already vaccinated in Vietnam. And I think AstraZeneca to date in Vietnam, together with our commercial agreements and donations and COVAX, we have delivered just around 50 million vaccines to Vietnam till now. So incredibly proud of that partnership with the Vietnamese government and society to date. Again, the aging population and the non-communicable disease burden, they somehow interlink, but of course we see the NCD burden coming to the younger population as well in most countries around the world. Again, Vietnam is no exception to that. And I think NCD burden is something where I see a huge opportunity for academia, institutions, public-private partnerships to come together, and we all must do our best to overcome this NCD burden, which in Vietnam and many other countries is a key contributor to the disease and to the illnesses and to the mortality. So I hope we can see a lot more partnerships in this space where we all come together to make a meaningful contribution and reduce the NCD burden in the society. Of course, in every pandemic, there is wisdom. COVID is no exception. We have all learned many valuable lessons from this pandemic around the world. We have all seen cracks in the system in some of the best systems in the world. And what that allows us to do is to together build back a much stronger community, a much stronger nation. And Vietnam and many other countries is embracing that challenge quite proactively, pivoting towards digital, other solutions and opportunities to ensure that we can build back better as a society, as a nation. And of course, the COVID impact, one of the biggest impact is the global backlog in the healthcare system, where patients have not been able to access their routine treatments or routine diagnosis and so on and so forth. And I think it will take a significant amount of effort of the healthcare community, of the society, of the government to ensure that that backlog gets cleared over the next few months to come. And again, this is another space I see that it's going to be a challenge during COVID and then post-pandemic as well. That's something we need to all keep an eye on to ensure that we can bounce back with ensuring that people are able to access their basic health needs. So go to the next slide, please. Vietnam, in terms of demographic, I'm sure you've all seen these lovely pyramids like that. Again, Vietnam is very similar. And I think, like many countries, the system is split between different levels, different tiers, depending on are you in a big city like Ho Chi Minh or Hanoi, or in a remote province or in a remote district. So Vietnam is a very similar structure. Those who are looking to enter the pharmaceutical industry or the sector, I think two key points here. What excites me most about Vietnam is Vietnam offers a blend of reimbursement and out-of-pocket market. So you have the opportunity to participate in government tenders as a company, but also collaborate with companies like Pharma City and other chains and institutions and private hospitals, where you can still cater need to the out-of-pocket segment in your business. As you go lower in the tier system, the access to innovative products become limited, and that is quite natural in a middle-income country or a low-middle-income country. But I think what is most encouraging in the last few years to see is the emergence of, you'll hear from Alex later on what Pharmacity has built as an example, hundreds of very high-end, sophisticated store, and coming from the UK, they all remind me of the good old equivalent of some high-end high street stores you would see. So very pleased to see that evolution in Vietnam, and I think this will lead to a better quality healthcare, a more reliable healthcare, and better quality products for the patients, for the consumer in the years to come. So a great amount of development and progress happening there in the private healthcare space, in the pharmacy space, as well as the hospital systems are getting better, stronger under the MOH guidance. Go to the next slide, please. Then I think moving on to the some of the points which Elaine touched on rightly and Sam touched on rightly, we see a huge amount of traction in this country with the M&A happening. And I think Elaine kind of touched on some of these M&As, but those are just some examples, but many more. AstraZeneca is no exception to this. We have also recently announced our interest to partner with a capable company to look at contract manufacturing opportunities and other opportunities in this wonderful country. And if you look at the CAGR, the growth rate opportunity between 2020 and 2025, you can clearly see that Vietnam, although the bubble size is small, but the opportunity in terms of growth rate is tremendous ahead of us. So I hope if you're already in Vietnam, you can capitalize on it. If you're not in Vietnam, it's a great time to enter to capitalize on this. Go to the next slide, please. Of course, in any market, Vietnam is no exception again. There are going to be this classic SWOT analysis, but I personally believe in every challenge, there is opportunities within that. And I think if with the right intention, with the right purpose, we can obviously overcome some of those challenges. However, I would emphasize the points which Elaine touched on. You need to have a pretty resilient mindset to navigate the healthcare system in Vietnam when it comes to registration, application of products, licenses, and so on and so forth. It is slightly cumbersome, but a very rewarding process, because at the end, you can see your products reach to the consumers, and you can feel the difference you're making to the society by improving the healthcare in this country. And then I think from a business standpoint, yes, there are challenges, but nothing which has prevented us in the last 27 years to slow down. And these challenges should not prevent anyone else to capitalize on this wonderful opportunity ahead of us in Vietnam. So go to the next slide. And I think with that, I pass it over to Alex, a good friend and a good colleague in the same industry. Sorry, Sam, to you, and then I'm sure you will pass it over to Alex. Sam, over to you.
I'll take the baton briefly back from you, Nitin, but many thanks for that. Really, really helpful. And obviously the experience of AstraZeneca here is immensely helpful, I'm sure, to all of our audience, and really helpful as well to hear your predictions about Vietnam's future prospects as well. So thank you very much for your time. But yes, I will absolutely pass over next to you, Alex. Thank you very much for being with us. We're delighted to have Miss Alex Ryland with us. Alex is the COO of the leading pharmacy chain, Pharmacity, one of the first modern retail pharmacy chains in Vietnam. And over the last decade, Pharmacity has grown significantly in scale, with 670 stores now open across the country. And obviously, as Nitin touched on, over-the-counter medicine accounts for a significant proportion of the market here, with nearly 2/3 of the pharma market coming from retail pharmacy and over-the-counter products. So Alex, thank you very much for being with us, and welcome. We would welcome your perspective, please, on the retail pharmaceutical market here in Vietnam. So over to you.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to Nitin and Elaine for their views as well. Nice to be part of this panel to give a retailer view on this. I, similar to Nitin, have been in Vietnam now for 4 years. And previous to that, I spent 17 years in Boots, the biggest retail pharmacy company in the world. So retail pharmacies is what I've been doing my whole career. And it's very, I'll echo what Nitin said, it's a very exciting market to be in from that point of view. So let's get started. You can go to the next slide, please. So very briefly, I'll introduce you to Pharmacity. We've been in the market for 10 years. Our vision is to be the most convenient pharmacy chain where you fully entrust your health and wellness in Vietnam. We aim by 2025 to enable 50% of the population to be within a 10-minute ride of a Pharmacity. And as you can see from the chart, our growth in the last 4 years has been strong. Our intent this year was to get to 1,000 stores, but unfortunately COVID slowed us a little bit. So we're going to end up at around 850 or 900 stores this year. And we aim to have 1,750 next year. Next slide. So as it stands today, as Sam said, we've got 670 stores. Our store footprint is actually pretty small. It's maybe only 50 to 60 square meters, but we do have a lot of stores that are conveniently located. 50% of our store base now is in Ho Chi Minh or in the surrounding 3 provinces, and expansion is going to take place throughout Vietnam next year. The little map with all the green spots shows Ho Chi Minh and the density of the population of our pharmacy stores. In the north, we've got about 90 stores in Hanoi and recently opened in Haiphong as well. We're the largest employer of pharmacists in Vietnam. We work very closely with several universities, and we sponsor existing pharmacists who want to take graduate degrees as well. A key strength that we have about 7 million loyalty members. So we're strongly investing in CRM capability to communicate with individual customers. Next slide. So to look at the market dynamics, the retail pharmacy market is valued at $1.2 billion US. This is IQVIA data. If you combine that with hospitals, it goes to 4.2 billion. COVID has slowed us in the last couple of years in terms of market growth, and future forecast, IQVIA predicts quite a small gain next year, but then back to a very strong growth rate of around 10% year on year from 2023. So overall, what that means is we'll get to a 40% growth rate from 2021 to 2025. Retail pharmacy is 30% share of the market, and we expect that to stay quite consistent unless anything happens with social insurance, which is currently only accessible in government hospitals. Next slide, please. So in terms of pharmacy, traditional mom and pops dominate the market still with 95% of pharmacies. And depending on the data you look at, there's maybe 50,000 pharmacies nationwide, but about 80% of the sales go through about 15,000 pharmacies. The chart here shows the evolution of chain pharmacies in the last 12 months. So you can see it's grown quite significantly, going from just over 700 outlets to 1,100 outlets, September to September. And I do believe that would have grown a lot more strongly had it not been for COVID. We're going to end up at around 900 outlets, and next year 1,750. Our competitor Long Chow, who's number 2 in terms of store count, they have 300 stores at the moment, aiming to get to 350 by the end of next year, and reported to get to 700 stores by next year. So strong growth in chain pharmacies to come in the next few years. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the main 3 players. Pharmacity has the most stores, and as a result, we have pretty strong brand awareness. We're a little bit less traditional in look and feel to the other players. We also have a broader range in vitamins and also non-medicine vitamin categories such as healthcare, personal care, and skincare. As I've mentioned, we've got strong loyalty and we're building on digital to support the opportunity there. Long Chow are a longer established brand. They're very well known for having a broad range of medicines. They're also owned by FPT Group, whose base business is telecoms. So they have the financial support to enable growth. They've been very aggressive on pricing and have very strong sales on e-commerce and hotline as well. Then the third is Ankang, and they were acquired by Mobile Group in 2018. Mobile Group is the largest retailer in Vietnam, and they're also a major player in terms of rank in Southeast Asia. The benefit that Ankang have is that they have access to a lot of retail space and traffic because they're siting their pharmacies within their supermarket chain, of which there's almost 2,000 outlets. So they have a strong ability to expand very fast. Next slide, please. So if we look at OTC specifically, OTC in the total market is about 30% of sales, so it's about 1.2 billion. If you look at retail pharmacy only, OTC is about 60% of the market, so it's about $750 million. One point to note is that in IQVIA data, it captures vitamins as well, so it's a little bit overstated, I think. Across the market, imported medicines is 2/3 of the share of the market, but also in terms of originator and generic, about 1/3 of the market is originator brands. There are local brands that are pretty strong in the market as well. So the number 2, 3, and 4 in the market behind Sanofi are all local brand owners. And I guess one example would be, I think, done very, very well is DHG. They've got a very strong challenger brand to Panadol called Hapicol, pictured here. They've also got a strong challenger brand in RX against Augmentin, which is the Clementin brand. And they've developed a very strong quality because they have Japanese investment. And so that's an example of a local brand doing very well in the OTC market. Next slide, please. So just to show you the makeup of the OTC category from my point of view, I don't think the category splits are actually that different from what you would find in other markets. I think maybe the major difference is that you'll see vitamins and you'll also see eye products in there. A lot of vitamins in Vietnam are actually classified as OTC products, registered as OTC products. And a lot of eye care drops are actually classified as OTC medicines where they would be medical devices in other markets. But if you take those out, it's gastro, pain relief, cough, cold, etc. Next slide, please. OTC in Vietnam isn't self-select like it is in many other markets. And it means that with a large amount of SKUs available, pharmacist is actually really key in consultation. So we have research which shows us how people select the brand they take out of the pharmacy with them. So 4%, the brand is stated on the prescription by the doctor. For 38%, pharmacists are recommending the brand. For 17%, where pharmacists recommend the brand when the patient requests a molecule. And 41% is where the patient requests by brand name. So you can see pharmacist interaction is actually really crucial for OTC in Vietnam. Next, please. So how would I summarize the challenges and the opportunities? I think the opportunities, I think we've all said. The growth of the market and the future potential is significant. I think some other opportunities for me are that non-self-select means that pharmacists can influence the brand decision. And I think also we have a very well-established distribution network. So a couple of the key global players are very well established here and have been operating for a number of years very successfully. In terms of the challenges, there is a huge amount of SKUs in OTC. If you take a basic product like 500 milligram paracetamol, IQVIA shows that there's 126 different SKUs in the market being sold today. So navigating that is going to be quite crucial. As Elaine talked about, the regulatory process in reality is 2 years plus, and the visa renewal process has had many delays in the past. I'll move on to vitamins now and talk a little about that. So this for me is a very interesting category. I believe it's got incredibly strong potential. The declared market size is around about $250 million. But what I'd say is there's a huge amount of hand carry. So that's where people go abroad and bring suitcase loads back, selling on marketplace or social selling. So it could easily be twice this size. The local brands do dominate still. So some of these brands are actually classified as OTC medicines. So an example would be the SKU in red there, and that is actually the #1 OTC SKU in the market, but it's a brain supplement and it could be registered as a food supplement. International brands are in the top 20 for sure. So Vitabiotics from the UK entered the market 2 years ago. It's growing very strongly and doing really, really well. And then Mega We Care from Thailand and also Barocca from Bayer have been very strong for a number of years. Next slide, please. Just to show a little bit more about the different categories, I think what's definitely true, and I'm sure is true around the world, is that general vitamin C's, multivitamins have had significant growth in the last 2 years, and it's skewed the dynamics of the vitamins market a little bit, all linked to immunity clearly. The market leader in that category is Barocca. Kids is a really interesting one for me because this is where we've come from quite a low base in recent years, but as the middle class grows, people are willing to invest in vitamins for kids. And there's some really strong market imported brands driving that market, such as Mega We Care, PN Kids and Brower from Australia. Beauty also is growing now. It's way behind other markets in Asia for sure. So if you look at other Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, etc., we're really under indexing on beauty, and I believe this is going to change quite dramatically in the coming years. So I'd say the market is still quite basic, but the potential to grow and develop is really quite interesting for me. Next slide, please. So just to sum up my final slide. So I think the big opportunity for vitamins is I don't feel like any international brand has really come in to the market and really intending to dominate the market. All of them have come in relatively slowly. So launching 7 or 8 products and then waiting a year and launching a few more products. So I think the opportunity to come in and really get to #1 quickly would be significant. An example would be Vitabiotics. They've launched a couple of years ago and already they're #1 in my pharmacy chain. Other opportunities, we've got a large population in Vietnam, so penetration is still quite low in this category. So if you look at other markets around, you can see that this should J-curve over the next few years. I think the other thing is, different to medicines, the regulatory process is actually not too difficult. It probably takes, from getting to get the paperwork correct, registration is a matter of 4 to 8 weeks. And once you've registered, then you can ship. I think the other benefit is that you don't have to have Vietnamese packs to be in the market. You can have Vietnamese back of pack labels, meaning it's quite easy to trial. And I think it's also an area where we're seeing that although people don't understand the category that well, they're learning. So COVID has brought more people into the category in terms of immunity products. People are also willing to spend in this category. So whereas medicines generally are relatively cheap, we're seeing that people, particularly in kids and beauty, are actually willing to spend quite a lot of money on these products. I think the other thing is that vitamins, although it's a self-select category, certainly in my stores, people are still wanting advice from pharmacists. So there's the ability to educate through the pharmacist interaction. I think on the challenges, I think customer understanding, you could say that's an opportunity, you could say it's a challenge. I think there's a lot of education still needed, particularly outside of the bigger cities. But I think that will come with time, and brands have a role to play in that for sure. I think also finding distributors who really understand brand development in the vitamin space is a challenge. That they do exist for sure, but it's finding the right distributor for your brand would be important. And I think a smaller challenge, but it exists for bigger brands, is that hand carry market can sway pricing. So if you've got a big brand and you're bringing it into the market, it's very possible that that brand already has a little bit of brand equity through social selling or marketplace selling, and pricing obviously can be a lot lower on that than through the regulated market. So that would be my summary of the opportunities and challenges on vitamins. I think it's, for me, a very strong category to look forward to for the future. So that's the end of my presentation there on those topics.
Alex, huge thanks for that. Really appreciate your time and your insights, and I'm sure that the audience will have found that really useful. We have a little bit of time for Q&A, so just a reminder that this is your chance to submit any questions you've got for our panelists, and we can hopefully get to those. But I might just open with a couple that were sent through in advance, if I may. So we have a couple here that I'll probably open up to all three of you, relating to Vietnam's domestic potential for developing an innovative IP-driven pharmaceutical industry. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on that, and kind of building on that, any reflections on how local companies might begin to compete meaningfully with large-scale corporations in terms of scale and in terms of intellectual property protection rights as well. Perhaps Elaine, I could turn to you first on that. So perhaps on the first point, the potential of a domestic IP-driven industry.
Sure. I feel like it's a bit of a tricky question when it comes to intellectual properties in Vietnam in general. And also, by all means, let me caveat, I'm not an IP lawyer. That's a different beast altogether, but I can provide a general overview. I think, like all things in Vietnam, especially in terms of IP, that Vietnam does have a sophisticated set of regulations on it, but the biggest challenge that comes of it is always the implementation, and it causes a lot of frustration with FIEs. But what is encouraging is we have seen as well over the years that when it comes to cases and case law, there is upholding of the infringement rights of an FIE. So it's not consistent, but it's on the right track. So to answer the question in short form, there is potential, but it will take time.
Elaine, thank you very much. Nitin, would you like to add anything on that one?
I think, firstly, I think building onto Elaine's comment, the good news is Vietnam is a member of WTO. Vietnam has got also quite a few bilateral trade agreements in place, including one with the UK recently concluded by the embassy here, a wonderful achievement. And I think these trade agreements does bring in the structure which Elaine touched on, and the guidance and the policies and procedures with that. In addition to that, in August 2019, Vietnam also rolled out the National Intellectual Property Strategy for 2030, and they're heading in the right direction. But I think we all must be mindful that Vietnam is an emerging country. There will be a learning curve here. And through that learning curve, we all need to collaborate, be patient, and be tolerant to some of the mistakes and the slow process which will go with it. So it's not perfect, it's improving. Enforcing IP and prosecuting someone is a whole different subject and a challenge, and I'm sure Elaine can touch on that, or you can consider the legal teams. But I think it's improving, but it's we are a bit far from that right now. I would say we would like to be, but I think nonetheless it has not stopped us and many companies progressing in Vietnam. Lastly, I would say on the domestic opportunities and the strengthening, AstraZeneca as a company in Vietnam, we are probably one of the largest clinical trial companies in this country for many years. And we see Vietnam improving its capability, whether it is the domestic pharmaceutical industry or clinical trial capabilities. It's slowly improving and definitely heading in the right direction. So I would say there is benefit of getting in the country early, that you have a learning curve. But of course, there is a challenge that you have to be a bit more patient and a bit more tolerant to that process. So personally, I would say net, great opportunity. It's not perfect, but it is heading in the right direction with the free trade agreements and the WTO and other bilateral agreements in place.
Thank you very much, Nitin. Alex, I'll just invite you to comment on that one as well, if you would.
Honestly, I think Nitin and Elaine are definitely the experts there, so I'll leave it to them on that, I think.
Very well, in which case I'll stay with you and ask you a different question that we've got here as well. So could you talk a little bit, Alex, about any advice you've got in terms of successful market entry strategies for UK companies looking to enter the Vietnamese
Sure.
market?
So I guess a couple of examples that I've got recently in the last couple of years would be in vitamins category. So we've had 2 UK brands enter the market. So we've had Nutrigen, which is a UK kids vitamins brand. I think what they did really well was they chose a very good distributor locally who could partner with us and work closely with us to develop the launch strategy and effectively the promotional marketing campaign. So we worked really closely with them to execute that well. And recently we were awarded by that business one of the prizes of best partner. So I think on that circumstance, that was great because of the distributor they used and the fact the distributor was here and could work closely with us. I think the other example would be Vitibiotics. It certainly was when I was in the UK, the biggest vitamins brand in the UK. And they have a team here on the ground. And again, I think very willing to work with us to understand what works for that category and how to bring it to market and the marketing approach. So I think really partnership is key with the retailer. And that's what I would say. I think for me, medicines is obviously slightly different because it's less promotionally driven, but certainly in vitamins, which is easier to access the market, I think just partnering closely with the retailer is crucial.
Great, many thanks, Alex. And there's another one here which I'll try and get right, which was about where did the data of pharmacist recommendations versus patients requesting brands come from in terms of the OTC market?
Sure. Yeah, it's a company called Sanosphere. So they do research throughout the market and they actually place people in the pharmacy to sit and observe. And they use our pharmacies for that as well as other pharmacies. So that's the company who do that research. Great,
many thanks. So I think the next one maybe I can open up, but perhaps Nitin, you'll have a comment. So the government is aiming to reduce spending on imported generic medicines. Do you have any comment on how that might bring challenges to international suppliers?
Depends. Do you see that as a challenge or do you see that as an opportunity? Turn the table. It is an opportunity if you're strengthening your local presence, right? So you could, as your own company, you could consider reducing your reliance on import and then potentially partnering on producing locally. So like I said, challenges can be turned quickly to an opportunity depending on how you approach it. The other point I would probably touch on, slightly linking Sam to your previous question about the entry and successful examples. I would say Elaine, rightly touched on the 2 ways to enter market. One is the FIE, the other one is M&A. Both are probably feasible, doable, if your business potential is large and you can afford that cumbersome structure, the resource, the governance, the complexity which goes with it. The third way, at least in our space, we see is work with a company which is already FIE and they have the import license to import products. and you could out-license your brand and work. And we see many of that examples happening. For an example, I mean, AstraZeneca as an FIE company, we are perfectly licensed to import our product or any other product. What we don't have permission to do is to be a distributor, and then you need to join hand with a local distributor further. But in terms of importation, you have three choices: set up FIE, work on an M&A option, work on an out-licensing subcontracting arrangement to get to the market quickly, so you don't have to sit and wait for the opportunity to land for 2 years or a year and a half, depending on how the process goes. So maybe Sam, yeah, I thought I'll touch on that comment as well. So in case we have anyone in the audience looking to enter the market at speed, there are options available in Vietnam for that.
Thank you, Nitin. That's very much appreciated, and I have no doubt that there will be some participants for whom that will be directly relevant as well. I'm afraid we are running out of time, so I think I will wrap up the Q&A there. But of course, if you do have any additional questions, I'm sure that the BritCham team can help to collect those subsequently and pass those on to our experts. So do send those through. But I just want to say a huge thank you to our three panelists, to Ms. Elaine Chu, to Mr. Nitin Kapoor, and to Ms. Alex Ryland. Thank you very, very much for the time that you've given today and for sharing all of your insights. To our audience, thank you all for being involved as well today and for sharing your questions with us. I hope that the session has been useful. I've really enjoyed it. But we'll wrap up there. Just invite the three of you to give any final thoughts before we close. So perhaps Elaine, if there's anything you'd like to just say before we wrap up.
I feel like I'm just going to repeat myself. I mean, just to say that I think pharmaceutical aside, and industry aside, I think in all sectors in Vietnam, there's always going to be potential. I'll just wrap up by saying that just come with a mindset of patience. I think then, and like what Nitin said, every challenge is actually an opportunity, depending on how you see it, and it will be rewarded by the end of it.
Thank you, Elaine. Nitin.
I would like to say, Sam, thank you for moderating it so well. Thank you, and wonderful to work with the panelists. And thank you to the audience for joining and for your valuable time today. Thank you.
Many thanks, Nitin. And last but not least, Alex, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm always happy to take interest from brands in the UK or other countries who want to launch in Vietnam. So if anybody has brands that are interested, please contact me. And yeah, thank you for the rest of the other panelists for their presentations today. Really interesting. I think I've learned something as well. So great, thank you.
Many thanks, Alex. Thanks to all three of you for your time. So that brings us to the end. Thank you all for joining, and thank you again to BritCham for organising this excellent series. Have a good evening to those of you in Vietnam, and a good afternoon to the rest of you. Great, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, bye.